The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction. And Ambassador Elena Vasquez had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood alone at a podium designed for species twice her size, surrounded by 943 alien delegations, who watched her with eyes and sensors and organs she could not even name. The year was 2347 by Earth calendar, and humanity had been part of the galactic community for exactly 80 years. 80 years that had changed everything. Elena kept her face calm as the Volanthi High Speaker rose from his elevated platform at the center of the chamber, his silver scales catching the light from a dozen artificial suns that floated near the ceiling. The Volanthi were the eldest species in the known galaxy, rulers of a hegemony that had dominated interstellar politics for 40,000 years, and when they spoke, everyone listened. "We have summoned the human delegation to address matters of grave concern," the High Speaker announced. His voice translated instantly into every known language through the neural implants that all diplomats wore. Elena noticed he did not say invited or requested, but summoned, as if humanity were a misbehaving child cold before angry parents around her. She could feel the weight of alien attention pressing down like a physical force. The Krillians sat in their military formation to her left, their insectoid bodies clicking with barely contained aggression. The Morvathi floated in their liquid suspension tanks to her right, their telepathic whispers tickling the edges of her consciousness behind her. 100 other species watched with curiosity or fear or contempt. And Elena understood that today would decide humanity's future among the stars. The High Speaker continued reading from a document that glowed in the air before him, each word landing like a hammer blow. First, the species known as humans will immediately cease all expansion beyond their currently allotted 12 star systems. Elena did not react, though her heart began to beat faster. Second, humans will surrender all research and technology related to their faster-than-light propulsion systems, which operate at an efficiency 400% beyond established galactic standards. Still, she remained motionless, her diplomatic training holding firm against the rising tide of anger in her chest. Third, humans will submit to genetic monitoring by the Council's Biological Oversight Committee to ensure they do not pose a destabilizing threat to galactic peace. Now Elena allowed herself a small breath, a tiny release of the tension building inside her. She had expected demands, but not this, not the complete surrender of everything humanity had built. The High Speaker lowered the glowing document and fixed his ancient eyes on her, and Elena saw something there that surprised her fear. The mighty Volanthi, rulers of 10,000 worlds, were afraid of a species that had only left its home planet within living memory. "These measures are necessary," the High Speaker said, and his voice carried a weight of authority that had crushed 100 rebellions over the millennia. "Because humanity's rate of advancement threatens the stability of our great galactic civilization." Elena finally understood what this was really about in 80 years. Humans had accomplished what other species took thousands of years to achieve. They had colonized 12 systems when they should have managed only 2 or 3. They had developed technology that made no sense to alien scientists who had studied physics for longer than human civilization had existed. They had built ships and stations and weapons that should have been impossible for such a young species in the galaxy had noticed, and the galaxy was terrified. The High Speaker spent the next 3 hours elaborating on the demands, explaining in excruciating detail exactly how humanity would be contained and controlled and reduced to something the Council could manage. Elena listened to every word without interruption, her face revealing nothing of the storm raging inside her. She thought of her grandmother, who had been alive when humans first made contact with alien life. She thought of her parents, who had helped build the colony on New Helsinki in humanity's 3rd star system. She thought of her daughter, who dreamed of exploring the unknown reaches of the galaxy. All of that would end if she accepted these demands. When the high speaker finally finished, a heavy silence fell over the chamber. 943 species waited to hear humanity's response, waited to see this young and troublesome race finally brought to. Elena cleared her throat and spoke the words that would change galactic history. I request a recess to consult with Earth. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. No species had ever asked for a recess during a council summons. The protocol was simple: listen, accept, comply. That was how things had always been done. The high speaker's confident smile flickered with uncertainty, but he granted the request because the rules technically allowed it. And the Volanthi were nothing if not devoted to their precious rules. Elena returned to the small human embassy attached to the council station, where she immediately opened a quantum communication link to Earth. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo appeared on the screen, her weathered face showing no surprise at the demands Elena relayed. We knew this day would come, the Secretary General said, her voice steady as stone. We have prepared our response. They spoke for less than an hour, and when Elena returned to the council chamber, she carried a single data chip in her hand. The high speaker watched her approach the podium with what he clearly expected to be humanity's surrender, and his silver scales rippled with satisfaction. The human delegation has returned, he announced. We trust you bring acceptable terms for negotiation. Elena looked up at him, then at the 943 species surrounding her, then at the cameras broadcasting this moment to trillions of beings across the galaxy. I bring humanity's official response, she said. She inserted the data chip into the podium's projection system. High speaker's smile grew wider, and the chamber fell silent in anticipation. They all expected to see humanity bend the knee. They all expected to witness another young species learn its place in the natural order. They were all about to learn just how wrong they were. Projection activated, and Secretary General Okonkwo's face appeared above the chamber, calm and resolute and utterly unafraid. The Galactic Council has demanded that we negotiate the terms of our subjugation, she began, and her voice filled every corner of that vast space. We decline. The silence that followed was absolute. Not a sound, not a movement, not even a breath from 943 delegations who could not believe what they had just heard. Elena stood at her podium and watched the high speaker's confident smile shatter into 1,000 pieces. Humanity had given its answer, and the galaxy would never be the same. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo's holographic image continued speaking as the council chamber sat frozen in shock, her words cutting through the silence like a blade through silk. There will be no negotiation, she said. Not because we wish for war, because we do not, but because what you ask is not negotiation at all. She paused, and Elena watched as 943 species leaned forward, desperate to understand what was happening. What you ask is surrender, the Secretary General continued. You ask us to give up what we have earned through sacrifice and ingenuity and will, and you offer nothing in return except the promise that you will not destroy us today. The high speaker of the Volanthi finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than before. This is unprecedented, he stammered. There are protocols for these matters. There are proper procedures that must be followed, but the recording was not finished. We understand that our growth frightens you, Secretary General Okonkwo said, and her eyes seemed to look directly at each delegate individually. We understand that we have accomplished in decades what you expected would take us centuries, and we understand that this makes us dangerous in your eyes. She straightened in her chair, and Elena felt a surge of pride watching her leader refuse to bend. But humanity does not negotiate away its future because others fear what we might become. And humanity does not surrender the stars because older species wish we would stay small and quiet and easy to control. The hologram flickered and then stabilized as it reached its final words. If the galaxy wants humanity to stop growing, the galaxy will have to make us stop. And I promise you this, the cost of that effort will be far greater than the cost of simply letting us be. The projection ended. Leaving the chamber in chaos, delegates screamed accusations in 100 different languages, while their translators struggled to keep up with the flood of outrage. The Volanthi demanded clarification, insisting that there must be some error in translation, because no species had ever refused the council so completely. The Marvathi broadcast telepathic waves of confusion and alarm that made several nearby species physically ill. The Trillions clicked their mandibles in what might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. Elena stood motionless at her podium, a small island of calm in a storm of alien fury, and she waited for the noise to die down. It took nearly an hour before the high speaker managed to restore order, his silver scales now pale with stress as he addressed the human ambassador. "Perhaps you do not understand the situation," he said, and his voice carried a threat that had broken countless civilizations before. "Perhaps your leaders do not comprehend what the council is capable of." Elena looked up at him and spoke clearly so that every word would be recorded and remembered. "We understand perfectly, High Speaker." "Then why," he demanded, "why would you choose destruction over cooperation?" Elena had prepared for this question her entire career. "Because what you call cooperation is not partnership," she explained. "It is dominance dressed in polite language. And humanity learned long ago that negotiating from forced weakness only delays the inevitable." She gestured at the assembled delegation surrounding her. "Every species in this chamber accepted your terms when they were young and weak. And every species in this chamber has spent millennia regretting that choice, bound by treaties they signed under threat of annihilation." A ripple of uncomfortable movement passed through the chamber as Elena continued. "We will not make that mistake, because we would rather face whatever comes today than live as servants for 1,000 generations." The High Speaker opened his mouth to respond, but a commotion from the Krillian section interrupted him. Admiral Korvax, Supreme Commander of the Krillian Imperium's military forces, had stood from his seat and was demanding recognition. Krillians were known throughout the galaxy as the most brutal and efficient warriors alive, conquerors of 300 worlds, and when their admiral spoke, even the Volanthi paid attention. "I request an emergency closed session of the Military Council," Korvax announced, his insectoid voice clicking with urgency. The High Speaker frowned at this break in protocol. "For what purpose, Admiral?" Korvax turned his compound eyes toward Elena, and she saw something in them that made her blood run cold. It was not anger or aggression or the desire for conquest that she expected from a Krillian. It was worry, because I have just accessed humanity's public military database, the Admiral said, and I believe the Council needs to see what I have found before we proceed any further. A murmur of confusion swept through the chamber. Public databases were common, routine, nothing special. Every species maintained records of their military capabilities for transparency purposes, though everyone understood these records were often incomplete or misleading. What could possibly be in a public database that warrants such urgency? The High Speaker demanded. Admiral Korvax's mandibles clicked in what Elena now recognized as the Krillian expression of deep concern. "They have been preparing," he said, and his voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, "for decades. The humans have been preparing for exactly this moment." He looked around the chamber at his fellow delegates. They knew we would eventually come for them, and they have spent every moment since first contact getting ready for war. The silence that followed was different. From before it was not the shocked silence of disbelief, but the heavy silence of growing Elena watched as 943 species began to understand that humanity was not the helpless young civilization they had assumed. What exactly did you find, Admiral? The High Speaker asked, though he no longer sounded confident. Admiral Korvax transmitted his findings to every display, and the chamber numbers appeared in the air. Charts and graphs and projections that made the meaning clear even to those who could not read human military notationship. Counts that seemed impossible for a species with only 12 systems industrial capacity that rivaled civilizations 10 times humanity's age research programs, advancing at speeds that defied explanation. And at the bottom of every page, the same phrase repeated over and over: all information current as of this date. Public access authorized. They are not hiding any of this, Korvax said, and his voice held something that might have been respect. They want us to know exactly what we would be fighting. The High Speaker stared at the numbers floating before him, and for the first time in 40,000 years of Volanti dominance, he did not know what to say. Elena allowed herself a small smile. Earth had sent its message loud and clear: humanity would not negotiate, and humanity would not surrender. If the galaxy wanted a war, humanity was ready to give them one. The emergency session of the Military Council convened in a smaller chamber deep within the station, where only senior military commanders and intelligence officials were permitted to enter. Admiral Korvax stood before a massive holographic display, his compound eyes reflecting the data that would change how the galaxy viewed humanity forever. Representatives from the 12 most powerful military species sat in tiered seating, their various appendages and manipulators twitching with nervous energy as the Krillian Admiral began his presentation. I want everyone here to understand something before I begin, Korvax said, his mandibles clicking slowly for emphasis. Everything I am about to show you comes from sources the humans made publicly available, which means they wanted us to find this information. The display activated, showing a map of human space that most delegates had seen before. 12 star systems connected by trade routes. Nothing remarkable, nothing threatening. Then Korvax pressed a control, and the map transformed. This is what human space actually looks like, he said. The 12 systems remained, but now they were surrounded by thousands of smaller markers, orbital platforms around every planet, mining operations in every asteroid belt, construction facilities on every moon. What had appeared to be a modest colonial effort was revealed as something far more extensive. Every world in human territory has been fortified, Korvax explained. Not just their capitals, not just their major colonies, but every single rock large enough to build on. A Volanthi general leaned forward in his seat. Surely this is defensive infrastructure, he said. Many species build fortifications when they are young and vulnerable. Korvax's mandibles clicked in what might have been her laugh. I thought so too at first, General, but look closer. The display zoomed in on one of the asteroid belts, revealing what the smaller markers actually represented: shipyards, thousands of shipyards, each capable of producing warships at a rate that made no sense for a species humanity's size. Our intelligence estimates suggested humans had perhaps 300 combat-capable vessels, Korvax said. That estimate was wrong by a factor of 30. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. Nearly 10,000 warships, the Admiral continued, with more being completed every day. And these are not the delicate precision vessels that most species prefer. He brought up schematics of human ship designs. And even Elena, watching through a secure feed from the main chamber, felt a chill at what she saw. Human ships were ugly compared to the elegant craft of older civilizations. They were blocky and armored and covered in weapons that seemed almost crude, but they were also simple, mass-produced, and designed for one purpose: to fight and keep fighting even when damaged beyond what any other species would consider survivable. Human military doctrine is unlike anything in galactic history, Korvax explained. Most civilizations, including my own, build irreplaceable vessels crewed by highly trained specialists. And we fight decisive battles where losing even a handful of ships is considered a catastrophe. He switched to a display showing human tactical simulations. Humans build ships to be lost, he said. They expect to take massive casualties in any engagement. And they have structured their entire military around the ability to absorb those losses and keep fighting. The Volanthi general spoke again, his silver scales rippling with disbelief. No species can sustain such a strategy, he insisted. The population loss alone would be devastating. That is what I thought, Korvax agreed. Until I looked at their crew rosters. The display changed to show personnel records, and the chamber fell completely silent. Every human warship is crewed entirely by volunteers, the admiral said. Every single one of them signed up knowing they would likely die. And there is a waiting list of millions more eager to take their place. My Morvathi intelligence officer sent a telepathic query that the translator converted to speech. This makes no sense from a survival perspective, she said. Why would any species evolve such self-destructive behavior? It was then that the oldest voice in the room finally spoke. The Arzelian observer had been sitting in the back of the chamber, watching silently as the presentation unfolded. His species was so ancient that they had been spacefaring before most current civilizations evolved sentience. And when an Arzelian chose to offer wisdom, even admirals and generals listened. I can answer that question, the observer said, because I have been studying humanity since they first ventured beyond their world. And I believe I finally understand what makes them so different from us. Every eye and sensor in the room turned toward him. We have always assumed that rapid advancement was impossible, he continued, because it requires accepting constant failure, and failure means death. And death is something all rational species seek to avoid. He rose slowly from his seat, his ancient form moving with deliberate care. But humans do not see failure the way we do, because to them, failure is not an ending but a lesson. He gestured at the holographic ships floating in the air. We spend centuries perfecting a single design before we build it, because we cannot afford the resources lost to failure. But humans build 100 failures in a decade. His voice grew stronger as he approached the central display. They crash ships. They lose crews. They watch their creations explode. And then they bury their dead, mourn them, and send their children to try again with what they learned from the wreckage. He turned to face the assembled military leaders. We thought this made them inferior, that their willingness to accept losses was a sign of primitiveness. But we were fools. The observer pointed at the ship, counts still blowing in the air. That willingness to fail is exactly why they have advanced further in 80 years than most species advance in 8,000. Silence held the chamber until Korvax finally spoke. There is more, he said, and his voice was heavy with reluctant admiration. The display changed again to show technical readouts that made several delegates gasp. Human scientists have successfully reverse-engineered the Lanthi shield technology, Krillian weapon systems, and the faster-than-light inhibitors that the Council planned to use against them. The Volanthi general surged to his feet. Impossible, he shouted. Those technologies are classified at the highest levels. They could not possibly have acquired them. Korvax shook his massive head. They did not steal them. General, they figured them out on their own. And according to captured research notes, their scientists considered the underlying principles, and I quote, obvious. The weight of that word settled over the room like a funeral shroud as the session dissolved into panicked discussions of what to do next. Elena received a transmission from Earth Secretary General Okonku's face appeared on her private display. Calm and resolute. Our fleets have finished repositioning, she said. Not for attack, Ambassador, but for defense. Elena understood immediately humanity would not strike first, would not give the galaxy any excuse to claim they were the aggressors. Hold the line, Okonkwo continued. Let them make the first move, because history is watching. And history must know that whatever happens next. Humanity did not start this war. Elena closed the transmission and returned her attention to the chaos unfolding in the council chambers. The galaxy had demanded humanity kneel instead. Humanity had stood up and shown them exactly what that demand would cost. Now everyone would have to live with the consequences. 3 days had passed since humanity refused to negotiate, and the Galactic Council was tearing itself apart. The Volanthi High Speaker stood before the main chamber once more, but his silver scales had lost their confident shine, and his voice carried the strain of desperate diplomacy, failing at every turn. The Volanthi hegemony, along with our coalition partners, issues the following ultimatum, he announced, reading from a document that 12 species had spent 70 hours debating. Humanity will comply with all council demands within one galactic cycle, or face corrective military action. It was a declaration of war in everything but name. And Elena Vasquez stood at her podium listening to words that could condemn her species to extinction, but something strange was happening in the chamber. Around her, the usual unified front of older civilizations against younger ones had cracked, and species that had spent millennia as obedient members of the Volanthi coalition were whispering among themselves with unprecedented boldness. Elena noticed the small delegations first, species from single-system civilizations that had never dared speak against their patrons, and she saw something in their eyes that looked almost like hope. Then the Ozelian observer rose from his seat, and the chamber fell silent once again. Before we proceed to vote on this ultimatum, he said, his ancient voice carrying easily across the vast space, I wish to make a formal nomination. The High Speaker frowned at this interruption. A nomination for what, observer? I nominate the human species for full council membership with unrestricted expansion rights. The chamber erupted in chaos even greater than before. Full membership had not been granted to any species in over 6,000 years, and the idea of giving it to humanity of all civilizations seemed like madness to many of the delegates screaming their objections. But the Arzelian continued speaking over the noise. My reasoning is simple, he said. A species this capable will either become our ally or our destroyer, and I choose to make them allies before they have any reason to be otherwise. The High Speaker struggled to restore order while simultaneously trying to understand what was happening to his carefully controlled council. This is highly irregular, he protested. There are procedures for membership applications that must be followed. Then let us follow them. The observer replied calmly. Unless you are suggesting that we should go to war against a species we could instead welcome as partners. The vote that followed split the council in ways that had not been seen for millennia. Smaller species, those who had chafed under Volanthi protection for thousands of years, began to see humanity as living proof that the old order could be challenged. Backroom alliances formed within hours as delegates calculated which side was more likely to win the coming conflict. The Krillians, surprisingly, abstained from the vote entirely, and when pressed for explanation, Admiral Korvax simply said that his people needed time to reconsider their position by the end of the first day. The Volanthi coalition had lost 3 member species to neutrality and 2 more to active support for humanity on Earth. Secretary General Amara Okonkwo watched the political chaos unfold while dealing with her own crisis. The United Parliament had convened in emergency session, and the factions that had been held together by external threat were now fracturing under the pressure of impossible choices. We should strike now, General Morrison argued, his scarred face tight with the conviction of a lifetime soldier. Every hour we wait gives them time to prepare their fleet, and every hour we wait also gives their coalition time to fall apart. Counselor Chun replied, her voice sharp with frustration. We gain nothing by proving their fears correct. The debate had been going on for 6 hours with no resolution, and Saitama listened to both sides, weighing the arguments, considering the consequences of each possible path. And finally, she made a decision that silenced the entire parliament. We will release everything, she said. The room went quiet as her words sank in. Everything? General Morrison repeated. You mean all of our classified capabilities? Every hidden shipyard? Every prototype weapon? All of it, Amara confirmed. Broadcast to every species in the galaxy simultaneously. The objections came immediately. Voices shouting about security and strategic advantage and the madness of revealing secrets that had taken decades to develop. Amara raised her hand, and the room fell silent. They think we are bluffing, she explained. They think our public database is exaggeration, that we have inflated our numbers to seem more threatening than we actually are. She stood from her chair and walked to the massive window overlooking the restored forests of the African continent. So let them see the truth, she continued. Let them see every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have built while they were busy deciding how to divide our territory among themselves. She turned back to face the parliament. Let them understand exactly what they are asking us to give up, and let them calculate for themselves what fighting us will cost. The vote was closer than Amara had hoped, but in the end, the parliament authorized full disclosure within hours. Encrypted transmissions carried humanity's complete military capabilities to every species in the known galaxy in the Volanthi High Command. Strategists who had been planning invasion routes suddenly found themselves staring at numbers that made no sense. The fleet they had prepared was massive by galactic standards. 4,000 warships drawn from 12 allied species. Enough firepower to destroy any known civilization, but humanity had 11,000 ships waiting at their border, with 3,000 more nearing completion in shipyards that ran every hour of every day. And behind those ships stood the factory worlds, automated production facilities that could replace every vessel lost in battle within months. And behind the factories stood the people, billions of humans who had grown up knowing that the galaxy feared them, who had trained and prepared and volunteered for exactly this moment. The Volanthi High Commander, a veteran of 300 successful campaigns over 2,000 years of service, reviewed the data with hands that would not stop trembling. Had never known defeat. His species had ruled the galaxy for 40,000 years precisely because they never fought wars they could not win. But as he looked at what humanity had built, as he counted the ships and the soldiers and the factories churning out more every day, he felt something his ancestors had deliberately bred out of the Volanthi bloodline generations ago. He felt doubt, and in the council chamber, as the final deadline approached, Elena Vasquez received word that the ultimatum-supporting coalition had lost another 4 species. Overnight, the galaxy was choosing sides. And for the first time in living memory, the Volanthi were not certain of victory. The moment of decision was approaching. War or peace, destruction or partnership, and humanity stood ready for whatever answer the galaxy chose to give. The Volanthi coalition fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of human space. 4,000 warships arranged in perfect formation. The largest armada assembled in 10,000 years. Admiral Korvax watched from his command vessel as the fleet took position. Though he was no longer commanding it, the Krillian Imperium had withdrawn from the coalition 3 days earlier, choosing neutrality over what Korvax privately believed would be a catastrophic mistake. Now he observed as a civilian, recording everything for the history archives. His species maintained. The Volanthi High Commander broadcast his final demand across all frequencies. Human forces will stand down immediately and allow council inspectors to assume control of your systems. Failure to comply within 1 hour will result in the complete destruction of your civilization. The response came not from any human ship, but from Earth itself. Transmitted directly to every vessel, and both fleets Secretary General Okonkwo appeared on every screen. Her voice calm despite the weight of the moment. The answer is still no. Then the human fleet moved. And Korvax felt his mandibles click in reluctant admiration. 11,000 ships advanced to meet the coalition armada. But these were not humanity's best vessels. These were their oldest ships, their most outdated designs. Crewed by volunteers who had signed away any hope of survival when they stepped aboard behind them. The real fleet waited behind that. The shipyards kept building. Humanity had done the mathematics of war. And they had concluded something terrifying. They can afford to lose the first battle. And the second and the 10th, could the Volanti say the same? The two fleets faced each other across 1,000,000 kilometers of empty space, weapons charged, crews ready, waiting for someone to make the first move in the council chamber on Varanthos Prime. The remaining delegates watched the confrontation unfold on massive display screen. Species that had already chosen sides sat in tense silence, while those still undecided leaned forward, desperate to see which way the wind would blow. Elena Vasquez stood at her podium for what she knew might be the last time if war broke out. She would be recalled to Earth immediately, and the diplomatic mission she had dedicated her life to would end in fire and blood. But she had one more card to play. "High Speaker," she said, her voice cutting through the terrified murmurs filling the chamber. "I wish to make a final statement before whatever happens next." The Volanthi leader looked down at her with exhausted eyes. He had not slept in days, and the coalition he had spent decades building was crumbling faster than he could hold it together. "You may speak, Ambassador." Elena took a deep breath and looked not at the High Speaker, but at the hundreds of smaller delegations surrounding her. "You have called us dangerous," she began. "You have called us reckless and aggressive and a threat to galactic peace. And perhaps you are right about all of those things." She let the admission hang in the air for a moment. "But we are also the species that looks at the impossible and says not yet. We are the species that fails 100 times and gets up 101. We are the species that buries our dead, mourns them, and sends their children to try again." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "You have ruled this galaxy through fear for 40,000 years, and we have been here for only 80. But already you fear us more than you fear each other." She pointed at the display showing the two fleets facing off in the darkness of space. "So here is humanity's offer. Our only offer. Not negotiation and not surrender, but partnership." The chamber went absolutely still. "True partnership," Elena continued. "As equals with all that we are and all that we will become. Help us build something greater than either of us could build alone." She lowered her hand and met the High Speaker's gaze directly. "Or try to stop us. And learn what humanity does when the galaxy tells us no." The silence stretched for an eternity, while the fate of trillions hung in the balance. Then the display flickered, and a new transmission appeared from the Volanthi command vessel. The High Commander's face filled the screen, his silver scales pale with strain, his ancient eyes carrying the weight of a decision no Volanthi had ever been forced to make. "All coalition vessels will stand down," he said, and his voice cracked on the final word. "Return to formation and await further orders." The chamber erupted in chaos. But it was a different kind of chaos than before relief. And shock and disbelief mixed together as delegates realized that war had been averted. At the last possible moment, the High Speaker stared at Elena with something that might have been hatred or might have been respect. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you offer partnership after everything we have done?" Elena smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had just won a battle that never needed to be fought. "Because we do not want to rule the galaxy, High Speaker. We just want to live in it. And you can either help us build a future worth living in, or you can get out of our way." 1 year later, Humanity received full council membership and a ceremony broadcast to every inhabited world in the known galaxy. The Azalian observer spoke at the induction, his ancient voice carrying across the vast chamber that had witnessed so much conflict and compromise. "We have welcomed many species to this council over the millennia," he said. "But humanity is the first to join, not by meeting our expectations, but by exceeding them so completely that we had no choice but to make room." He paused, looking out at the assembled delegates with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall for longer than most species had existed. May the galaxy never forget this lesson. The stars belong to those bold enough to claim them on Earth. Secretary General Amara Otankul watched the ceremony from her office, surrounded by the advisors and generals and diplomats who had helped guide humanity through its greatest crisis. Outside her window, children played in the gardens of the capital, the first generation of humans to grow up as full citizens of a galactic civilization. They would never know how close everything had come to destruction, how a single wrong word or premature shot could have ended humanity's story before it truly began. But they would grow up knowing something else, something that Elena Vasquez and the volunteers of the First Fleet and everyone who had stood firm during those terrible days had taught the entire galaxy: humanity does not surrender, and when the universe says something cannot be done, humanity answers with two simple words: watch us. The stars stretched out before them, infinite and unknown and waiting to be explored, and this was only the beginning.